My name is Deborah Dwork, and I am the director of the Center for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at the Graduate Center, City University of New York. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to the second of our year-long virtual series, Out of the Frame. The historical record is marked by events, people, and communities that remain just outside of the frame. They are there, clearly visible, but no one pays attention to them, and we should. Out of the Frame aims to center these long overlooked topics and groups. I thank our series partners, NYU's Professor Emerita of Hebrew and Judaic Studies, Marian Kaplan, and Stockton University Professor in the Study of Modern Genocide, Raz Segal. I thank, too, Center Associate Juan Acevedo, Dr. Eli Karetny, Deputy Director of the Ralph Bunche Institute, and the GC's terrific IT people, Brad Holshore, Steve Thomas, and Eric Williard. Above all, I am grateful to our guest speakers and to everyone who has tuned in. Thank you for joining. It is my pleasure to say a few words about our guests today. Award-winning journalist Rebecca Clarren has been writing about the American West for more than 20 years. Her debut novel, Kickdown, was shortlisted for the PEN Bellwether Prize. She will speak today about her second book, The Cost of Free Land. Recently published, literally hot off the press, The Cost of Free Land is not a work of fiction. It is grounded in her own family history. With rigor and compassion, Rebecca Clarren tackles the personal and national consequences of the U.S. government's practice of handing out land it robbed from indigenous nations to white settlers, including to Rebecca's great-great-grandparents. Government depredation is something Wayne Ducheneaux knows something about. A member of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, Mr. Ducheneaux is the executive director of the Native Governance Center, a Native-led nonprofit organization whose mission is to help tribes grow their capacity to exercise sovereignty. He previously had served a term on the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Council and had served as the tribal vice chairman for 2 years. Ms. Clarren and Mr. Ducheneaux will be in conversation with one another. They and I invite you to pose questions in the Q&A function, and they will turn to them during the Q&A period of our event today. Rebecca and Wayne, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here, and it is a delight to be here with my friend Wayne Ducheneaux, who I have had the great pleasure of knowing now for what, 6 years maybe?
Yes, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Before we get started, I just wanted to take a moment and say to all of you here how nice it is to be connected here, even in this virtual space. I know I'm having a very hard time navigating social media, and I'm just so glad that we can be here and having real conversation. You may feel a lot of big feelings. I know I do. I feel a lot of grief and anger and fear sometimes. And so I just want to make space for all of that. And I want to say that what has become increasingly feels true to me, that is, in light of the suffering that is happening in Gaza and in Israel, it feels more important than ever that we study histories of oppression, such as the history we're here to talk about today, this very specific history about America. And so without further ado, let's take it away, Wayne.
Right on. Well, briefly, Rebecca, if you don't mind, I want to introduce myself in Lakota language. So how me talk yipi, chante washtena pechi uzapi, Wayne Ducheneaux II. So what I said there briefly was, hello, my relatives. I greet you with a good heart and handshake. My name is Wayne Ducheneaux. Like Deborah said, I'm an enrolled citizen of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribe, calling in from our tribal homelands in north central South Dakota. And man, thinking back that it's been 6 years already since we first met, since you took that shot and reached out to me. It's been a wonderful, wonderful experience walking with you on this journey and developing the cost of free land. And to kind of kick us off, I know the audience is curious, what gave you the idea to write the book in the first place?
Well, thank you. You know, I think this book started with 3 central questions. What are the stories we tell in families and in nations? What are the stories we don't tell? And why don't we tell those stories? As Deborah mentioned, I grew up, well, my family were Jewish homesteaders who had escaped oppression in Russia and came to America in large part because they were able to get free land on the South Dakota prairie. The federal government gave them a 160-acre homestead. My great-great-grandparents, they had 6 kids. Almost each of those kids gets their own homestead eventually. And I grew up hearing really amazing stories. I don't know if I've ever told you any of these stories. Like, there's a bunch in the book. I'll just share, like, they were really stories about like tenacity and pluckiness. And so stories about my cousin who every morning would clear a path from his family's claim shack to the outhouse of rattlesnakes when he's 5. And they kind of, all the stories kind of bend along that same line. And it took me what I now feel like was a really embarrassingly long time to recognize there was a lot of white space at the edges of those stories. That I have been a journalist about writing mostly about the American West for over 20 years. And throughout that time, of course, you don't cover the American West without writing about Native nations and Native communities. And, you know, I was working on this series that ran in the Nation and Indian Country Today. And that's where I think you and I first got connected. And it was all about Native nations, tribes, tribal citizens. And I had this slow dawning realization, these stories I'm telling, where I'm pointing fingers at the federal government for the ways their policies have harmed Native people. I'm not on the outside of these stories. I'm not an unbiased person here, reporter. Like, my position here is very close because of recognizing that my family, that I myself benefited from those policies that harmed poor people in particular. My family's ranch was only 13 miles, as you know, from Bridger, which is the southwest corner of Cheyenne River. And at the time when my family gets there, there's the river's undammed. People would go back and forth a lot. And yet we had no stories growing up about our Lakota neighbors. So I think that's what motivated this project, was to try and step directly into this history and try and say, what weren't we telling and why, and how do we grapple with that today? You know, I wondered what stories you had been told when you were growing up about the non-Indigenous people who were living around you. Yeah,
it's one of those things, like, I hadn't realized until meeting with you and conversing with you about your family history, the prevalence of Jewish settlers in the area, right? Like that. So that's something that completely caught me by surprise. One of my favorite stories is about your uncle that was the cowboy, the bronc rider, right? Like, I think that was a fantastic story. And so, like, I hadn't heard much about Jewish settlement. And but you know, growing up, I'm of mixed descent, right? So I'm French and Indian, like the war. And it's one of those things where we've on Cheyenne River counted non-native people here since, you know, the 1800s, late 1700s. Our people have stories about the intertwining and the intermarrying and all that type of stuff of working with non-native folks. And so, but it's one of those things that I think is just anymore in today's modern context, it's just a part of who we are. So to give some context, when your people came and settled, right, the Great Sioux Nation was the entire western half of South Dakota, dipped up into North Dakota, a little bit in the corner of Montana, eastern half of Wyoming, down into Nebraska. And that was the Great Sioux Nation Reservation. Where we're at now, the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Reservation is the exterior boundaries are the entirety of Dewey and Ziebach County in South Dakota. And so it's roughly the size of Connecticut, right? And like you mentioned, Bridger in the southwest corner is 85 miles one way to Eagle Butte, which is like the center of the headquarters, right? And so just so folks can kind of get a context to understand the amount of land that was here. And, you know, right now, as it stands, of our reservation, it's about half and half because of homesteading and the Allotment Act. About half is owned by non-native folks, and the other half is owned by the tribe itself or tribal citizens. And so, yeah, it's something that, you know, I have non-native folks in my family tree, so that has always been a part of it. But it was really intriguing to learn about not only your family's coming to this land, but then some of the other, like, not only ranching, but other stories that your family's experience and my family's experience shared. So that was just a fantastic thing. And that's something I've cherished in getting to know you. And I don't want to dip into any of those surprises, because I wanted to see if you wanted to kind of talk about what are some of the things that while you were working on the book really surprised you.
There were so many. I mean, really, just to dovetail on what you're saying, I thought I knew a lot about, obviously there are more than 570 federally recognized Native nations. I didn't think I knew very much about all of them at all, but I had certainly visited a lot of reservations in the West. I had no idea that there were so that, like on Cheyenne River, what is it, that half of the reservation itself is owned by non-native people, and all of the ways that makes it so difficult for your community, your native community, to like do economic development and things like that. I mean, I really didn't, that was very surprising. Isn't on Standing Rock, which is the reservation just to the north, isn't it more like 2/3 of it is owned by non-native? I mean, that's a lot of land. I think when another thing that really surprised me was there's a wonderful geography professor at Haskell, Josh Mizell, and he helped me really dig into the treaties and do some math. And our estimate is that, like, between the Treaty of 1851 that Lakota signed with the United States, and when my family first plants their own crops in 1908, the United States had taken or stolen 98% of the land that it had promised in that 1851 treaty. So that's a huge, even though, yes, Cheyenne River is very large. Think about the distance from how much more land had been reserved. There are so many things that surprised me, but and if people have questions, I'm happy to answer more of them. But I think one of the major things that I didn't know was the way that Hitler was inspired by America's treatment of Native people. And I just want to back up here and say, I was a kid who was obsessed with the Holocaust. I was totally like that preteen who was dramatically reading Anne Frank in the living room, and, you know, really reading all the books I could. And yet I never knew until a Lakota elder who, of course, you know, Doug Whiteville, who he was your basketball coach, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And he and I got to know each other because there's this somewhat mysterious photograph of his ancestor and mine shaking hands in a studio in what was probably 1919. And I have come to know and spent a lot of time with Doug. And Doug was a teacher for 30 or 40 years in Lakota communities, huge interest in history. And he's the one who told me, you know, Hitler was inspired by the way America treated us. And then I went and did a lot of research, and there's a whole book, there's many books written about this. And yeah, to learn that Hitler based his concentration camps on the reservation idea. Hitler starved the Jews so that they wouldn't have the energy to rebel.
Yep.
Based on how America did that to Native people. The list kind of goes on and on. I remember there was this one night, it was the day after Holocaust Remembrance Day, and Doug called, or I called him, and he said, I was listening to these Holocaust survivors last night, and I on the radio or the television, and I was immediately thought of your family.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, America should condone the Nazis. They should, but why doesn't America condone itself? Like, we had a Holocaust here for 400 years, and no one ever talks about it. And it made me curious, when in my reporting, like, I regularly in Lakota communities heard people reference the Holocaust here, the Holocaust that happened to us. And yet that is not something I had ever heard, certainly growing up, attending school, or in non-Native communities. And I just wonder if we'd feel comfortable talking a little about if that's something you've heard a lot growing up, of people talking about the Holocaust and what they mean when they say that.
And you said condone, I think you meant condemn.
Yes,
That
I
we should-
did.
we should- we
Condemn.
should not
Thank you.
We should
Yeah,
condemn.
Yeah.
Just no questions. We don't need that question.
Thank you.
No, and it's the parallels in my life that have been drawn between what Jewish folks experienced during World War II and that Holocaust and the experience here. I learned very early on about, Adolf Hitler copying, learning from America, how this stuff, how to decimate a population, right? And it's confine them, it's break their will, break their spirit. So when I think about the parallels, and I'm going to get emotional here, but right, when I think about the mass graves and the stuff that Jewish folks experienced, we experienced that here. We experienced it with our relatives. So for folks that don't know, Plains Indians, especially the Lakota people, we were a nomadic people that subsisted mainly on buffalo or bison. And so I'm sure folks here in the chat or in the Zoom have seen the pictures of, huge 40, 50 foot tall pyramids of buffalo skulls, where in order to most cripple our people as a society is to take away that main source of sustenance, right? There's a great research paper that Donna Fear did at the Center for Indian Country Development that talks about prior to the decimation of the American bison population, the average Plains Indian family was as wealthy compared to a upper middle class family in Europe, as far as needs being met, resources they had at their disposal, right? And so the American government was very intentional in its process to decimate our ability as a people to survive. And the fact that Hitler was able to take and learn from the greatest democracy in the world how to commit genocide it's one of those ugly truths that oftentimes Americans don't like to, oftentimes they don't know, they're ignorant to it. And then when you educate them, it's like they don't want to hear it, right? It's they want to plug their ears and and not hear it. But it's something that I think folks need to understand, right? And I think, like we talked a little bit in the past, where every non-native person's right to occupy space on this continent doesn't germinate from the sovereignty of the federal government or the state or the county with which you reside. It comes from treaties and the sovereignty of Native people. And you're 100% right. Deborah mentioned it about land robbed, right? Literally every person's right to occupy this land either came through cessation and treaties, and the only reason a treaty happens is because people are viewed as equals, or through outright theft. So when you can't beat someone, you steal from them, right? And so, some of those legacies about the parallels, I think I've had, I was fortunate to learn it very early on. And it's one of those things that I think opportunities like this, reading your book, the more we can put this education out in front of people and folks can recognize that truth, then we can really truly get to a place of reconciliation, which is one of the things I hope, and I know your book will help bring that about. But I want to pivot real quick and talk about, because I know you and I both know like Matthew Fletcher in common. Matthew Fletcher is an Indigenous law professor at Michigan State University. And we're talking about some of these abstract things, but it's really there's a legacy of federal policies that impacted Native people, the Allotment Act, like where your family was able to gather land, but it's still impacting us today. And so can you tell me, why was it important for you to write this book in a way that toggles back and forth through that history of policy and the present day and past, so the past into the present?
I somewhat ask a lot of my readers because, yeah, as I'm not only toggling between the immigrant Jewish story and the Lakota story, and those are a mix of personal family stories told about my own family and the White Bull family, and then really deepened and contextualized with a lot of, history and journalism. But I also, I toggle back and forth between what has happened in the past and what is happening now. And I guess it was just very important to me to try and telegraph history doesn't live in a box. I think for so long, the way I grew up, the stories I was told in school, the history, I understood history as something we were walking away from. I think that's very American. It's in the past, look to the future. And yet, after spending time with Lakota elders, and honestly, also after spending time studying ancient Jewish texts, I now think of history, as I say this in the book, like it's like as if the past is looped to this current moment, like thread through a seam. And so it's that sense that this history is not that far away. Like Lakota elders talk to me about how, like, I am, maybe they're 80 years old, but like their grandmother would tell them stories, and that's 160 years behind. And suddenly that sense of distance is really collapsed. I was so fascinated. I remember, I think we were in your truck and we were talking about the tense of Lakota language itself, that like within even the construct of the language, please, I would like you to talk about this, and I'm not, but I was so curious about how the construct of the language reinforces this sense of time, maybe, or at least time is influenced one way or another. And I wondered if you could talk about that and sort of how you think about history and these things.
Well, it's one of those things, like our society, our people, we didn't have a really detailed written language like folks from Western civilization. So our storytelling, our language became that, and the complexity in it was our way to be able to quantify and qualify throughout history our lived experience, right? And so it's really cool. Like that's one of the most beautiful things about Lakota language in particular, is how changing a vowel sound here, adding a guttural there to a word, can completely change the text, and which makes it so hard to translate straight to English, because there are concepts within our language, there are thought processes within our language that can be said with 5 Lakota words that you can't say with 5 pages in English, right? And so it's one of those things that I think, as I am a late to language learner, right? Like it was one of those things just to share with folks briefly, both of my parents were products of boarding schools, and so not taught Lakota language. Both of my grandparents, or my grandparents on my father's side, were speakers. My dad could understand but didn't speak. My mom, even further back, her family lost the language, right? And so it's one of those things that I learn something new every day as I'm on this journey trying to learn Lakota language, that I think really helps to contextualize and help me then understand something that I think is really important about the wisdom that lives in indigeneity, and how, as we are losing that language, as we're losing that part of our culture, so vital for us to revitalize and claim back. It's just similar to like the how the Jewish experience, right, with you all having the attempt to decimate your culture, being forbidden to speak, all that type of stuff. Like it's really that strong parallel that then helps me to understand history in a little bit different way. The oral tradition and the history is something that I think is particularly fun. And you've had this experience, right? You get to sit down, you sat down with tribal elders and hear them tell things from their perspective, and how it can meander and wander back in past and presence just because of the tense of the language.
Because the tense, my understanding is that there's no sort of past tense. It's everything that's happened into this exact moment, and then the future, right? Is that correct?
And so oftentimes you hear in talking about Indigenous culture, the 7th generation mindset, right? Where the decisions we make today have an effect 7 generations into the future. But the tense you're talking about really changes that perspective. And the way I had a great mentor named Regis Pecos from the Cochiti Pueblo in the Southwest explain it to me is, instead of thinking about 7 generations in the term of 7 generations out, place yourself in the middle. So this is where it's going to resonate, right? If you're in the middle of that 7 generations, oftentimes people have the good fortune of living with their parents, their grandparents, and their great-grandparents. And then they're able to have kids, grandkids, and great-grandkids, right? So that's that 7 generation. And so the language we have as a people covers that and allows for the extrapolation of that historical context into this modern day. So it's almost like a seamless education, I think, and something that is greatly absent today with the decimation of our language.
Yeah, I wanted to make a point. You said we lost our language, and I thought that's a nice way to put it. Like, for those of you who don't know, and I would assume many of you here today do, there was an incredibly intentional effort by the United States to eradicate and decimate Lakota culture, religion, tradition, and language. And my sense, reading the history, Wayne, of course, I want to hear if you agree, is that was to try and largely that effort to assimilation, what we call today cultural genocide, was to diminish the connection that Lakota people had with their land. So it was easier to take the land.
Kill the Indian, save the man, right? That's the famous quote that's out there in the world. And it's one of those things that, again, the intentionality, the insidiousness of it all too. Like it's one of those things that I can't imagine sitting in a room with people and thinking of ways to do what's happened to Jewish people, Native people, right? It takes a certain amount of evil to do that. And so it's one of those things that why this type of conversation is important, why this type of history needs to be told, so that folks can understand and see, like, even though you weren't a part of that insidiousness, the reason you're at where you're at in the world is because of it, right? So, I mean, non-Native folks have benefited from that. Native folks are in some situations because of it. And so it's really, there's a healing process that can come through understanding this complicated history. And so I think it's one of those things for me that so important why this type of issue gets discussed. But I want to pivot real quick because I want to acknowledge something. Like, you talked about your journalism background, which I think makes this book so intriguing to me. You're not just a book author who's just wrote books their entire career, right? You've come from this investigative position, and so it's not but I think it's a little bit atypical for journalists to grapple so personally with something, because you can really feel in the book, like at least I did reading it, like your personal journey in this and how the pride and the sense you have of your family and who they were and they came from. But then when you learned and understood, like, man, it came at this cost, right? And so as you're walking back and forth, can you talk a little bit more your journey through that and what you learned through that process?
Yeah, I would love to. So I think, as you know, Wayne, I've talked to you, there's this indigenous judge who is from the Yurok Nation in Northern California. And when I was writing that series, I wrote a profile about Judge Abby Abenanti for The Nation magazine. And she runs her courtroom. She used to be a California Superior Court justice, but she now is only, it's a big enough job, the Chief Justice for the Yurok Nation. And she runs her court with really justice seeped in traditional values. And so she said to me early on, before this was really even a book, she said, if you're going to write this history, you've got to think about it in a cultural way yourself. What did the Jews say about how to respond to a harm, even when you didn't directly commit, but when you benefited from? And that spurred me to spend several years actually studying ancient Jewish text with my rabbi here in Portland, Oregon, Benjamin Barnett, who our synagogue is very dedicated to social justice. And I think he felt right away that the studying we would do would be useful to our larger community. And the kind of studying we did, we looked at ancient texts for places where Jewish people have talked about how to atone, how to repair, how to repent, and also reading contemporary rabbis who are using these texts to grapple with what one of them said is America's original sins, which she writes is the taking of native land, the theft of native land, and of course the enslaving of Black bodies. I think another thing, and so it was really Judge Abby that said that I was following her guidance. I really trust her, and I thought, okay, I'll do that. That seems, I mean, it wasn't my idea. I really was just, she's my elder and she's so smart. And so I thought, okay, I'll do what she says. And the other thing she said that really stuck with me is that she said, you know, your ancestors, they were running for their life in terror when they came to America. They really were. I mean, my great-great-grandfather was beaten to within an inch of his life in a terrible pogrom in Odessa. And they had their rights were so restricted where they lived in what was called the Pale of Settlement in Eastern Europe. And she said, you know, when you're running for your life in terror, which is what your family was doing when they come to America, you're not stopping to have a quick restorative justice conversation along the way. She said it's going to take a couple generations of not living with that trauma, not inheriting the trauma that gets passed on. And so it's right that it's come to you and to your generation to attend to this, because, you know, it's you were lucky. You were fortunate. You didn't grow up with that kind of handed down trauma. And so I guess it is weird as a reporter, like journalists are not, it's not the training to say, I'm going to come up with a solution. I'm going to grapple with this. The job is usually, as I understand it, to see injustice, to write about it, to disrupt, you know, to try and disrupt what's happening by talking about it. But to come up to kind of grapple personally, that's not usually the job. But this story is just so personal. I didn't feel like I really didn't feel like I could do it any other way. Yeah. So I think that's why, you know.
Well, I think one of the things you said there kind of caught my ear is that, did you say you haven't lived with the trauma? But I think it's like, I think we all have. Like, I think all of us who have had people who have lived through this, and it surfaces up, and then how we respond today. So I think your act of completing this book, your act of trying to educate people on these things, are a direct response to that trauma that you still hold from what your ancestors went through. I talk about this story all the time, where I can't imagine the trauma of boarding school when non-Native folks came on reservations and ripped children away from families and took them. At first, you know, like boarding schools were closed, and then they began like sending Lakota kids to Pennsylvania and Carlisle Indian School, because the further they could get away, the easier it was to disconnect. And
at the age of like 5, they were so young. Yeah.
Yep. And it was one of those things where I never I was like you, like I didn't think that affected me in any big way until I had my own kids. And then just a quick story. When my son Aiden was 2.5, we were living in Minnesota just before the pandemic, and he was in his pre-K class, and his teacher's like, you know, we want him to start coming to the center. Are you guys cool with that? They go, yeah, well, they have a bus that they could send and pick him up. So that's awesome. She said, I'll be on the bus. I'll be there to greet him. I'll walk him in. He knows me. He can sit down and we can go through. And the morning comes and the bus pulls in and the teacher's not there. So it's a strange bus driver and a strange bus driving assistant. But we brave-faced, you know, and we brought my son to the door and we opened it up, and they said, well, you can just come on in and set him down and then just turn and walk away. That's what we found is easiest. So I said, have a good day at school, buddy. And I sent him down and I turned and walked away, and he lost it. And Dad, and he wasn't verbal. Like so my son has autism, so he wasn't very verbal, but he said, Dad. And so I stopped and turned at the door as they shut it. And the lady went to try to put the seatbelts on him, and he slunk down to try to get away. When she grabs him by his collar, picks him up and places him in the chair, and then like is belting him in as he is losing his mind. And something triggered in me where I start banging on the door, and I thought I was going to break the door in my hand. And I'm like, open this door. And the bus driver, no, it's good. He'll be fine. I'm like, open this door now. I'm taking my son. And so reluctantly, you could see the bus driver open the door. I don't know if he thought I was going to attack him, but I calmly walked by, inserted myself in between my son and that bus driving assistant, and I grabbed my son and I took him away. And they said, sir, he'll be fine. I said, I don't want this to be his experience going to school for the first time. Yeah. So if it takes me driving the 10 minutes, his experience going to school would be was going to be a positive one. When I got home, and so then we took him, got into the center, everything was fine. When we got home, I was shook and I didn't understand why. So I called my Uncle Les, who you got to meet, right? And I discussed with him, like, I don't know what I felt. And he said, Wayne, that's the historical trauma that lives through you. And what you experienced was just a modicum of what our ancestors experienced, because you could control it. You had the ability to intercede and to take your son, whereas oftentimes those children were taken away by force. And so it's just, it's one of those things that I think, I don't know, there can be some really strong feelings like you talked about associated around all these things. And it's important that we talk through it and talk about it.
Thank you for sharing that. It's so powerful. And you're right. It's not like that history. It's not behind me. It's not in a box. Like I am removed enough from it that I hope I can see it more clear-eyed. I can make sense of it a little bit. I can have a distance on it, but you're right. It's right here. It is. I mean, and I think there's so much. I like to talk about like the Jewish adaptive anxiety. Like I've always got a plan A. I'm that person who's in a restaurant who's like, okay, how do I get out? Like looking very calm on the outside, but inside my mind, I'm like, what's the exit? And I really think I think it's Jewish. Like, I think it's that inherited, how do I keep my people safe? I always say to my kids, my job is to keep you safe. And so, but also recognizing like, it was such a privilege to study this history and have more insight into some of that, like how, for example, my great-great-grandmother, she would tell her sons in particular on the South Dakota prairie, you must become multimillionaires. And that spawned a lot of like behavior that maybe wasn't ideal. And yet reading the history, I understand now that throughout for hundreds and hundreds of years, Jews would be exiled over and over and over again from every country in Europe, right? And yet the rich Jews, they could stay often. Often there was a law that would say the rich Jews can stick around a little longer. And so I really believe now that like my great-great-grandmother saying, Fegatka telling her sons, be multimillionaires. That was her saying, my job is to keep you safe. Yep. That's how we're going to survive in America. And it takes a long time to understand that that's what's going on, to have. For me, it's been very helpful to look at this past with a lot of empathy and compassion. That was something my rabbi told me early on. He said, you have to tell the truth and do it with compassion. And it's not always easy, but it has felt like such a gift, actually, because it does help me to start to interrupt some of that patterning once I can see where it comes from, the fear that it's based in,
Yeah. Sorry, we've never talked about that before. Like I do the same thing. Like when I'm sitting at a restaurant, I like to be in the corner. I like to be facing out so I can see everything. Or when we stay in a hotel room, I like to sleep closest to the door, those type of things. It's just amazing how that bubbles up through and it's idiosyncrasy. So yeah, it's just crazy.
Oh, funny. Oh God. I want to, what we're talking about is very heavy. And I think it's understandable that when people are reading my book, I really appreciate, I think this is my 17th event since the book came out October 5th. And I've done a lot of readings, which has been wonderful. And I love meeting readers. And so many people have been coming up to me and saying, my family had a homestead. Until this moment, I never thought about where our land came from. And I think people say, I feel really guilty that I didn't know that. I feel so bad. And I am curious if you want to share a little about what you think about guilt as an emotion. What I know I'm asking you a leading question, but maybe if there's not, like, is something preferable to the response of guilt?
Well, and I think it's one of those things where, and I'll be a little crass about this, so please forgive me. I won't use any foul language, but when people read this book, they earn that guilt, right? You're ignorant before, And by understanding these things, you're earning that guilt. And guilt's not a bad thing, right? Guilt is something that the Creator put in us to help us process things that we know are wrong. And so the important thing is, as you earn that guilt, you learn from that guilt. What can I do to be better? What can I do to improve so that moving forward, I can break chains, I can break cycles, and I can ensure that the work that I do in my life gets us back to that value set with which we hold our communities together, right? Like the Jewish people have your strong value set, Indigenous people, we have our strong values, right? Our life's journey should be earning things and then learning from them to get that place to where we're actually walking and talking about our values consistently. And it's also one of those things that I think we're seeing some of that reparative work start today, right? We're seeing more and more often folks are doing land acknowledgements at various events, and Native Governance Center has played a prominent role in that circle since 2019, when we hosted our first land acknowledgement event with some partners at Metro State and the Lower Phelan Creek Project. And real quick aside, a little funny bit, take full credit for the Oscars starting to do land acknowledgements. They did it that year for the first time after our event. And I think I have a couple of my staff watching. I'm just kidding. But, we did our event, and then several weeks later, Taika Waititi got up in front of the Oscars and did their first Indigenous land acknowledgement. So they didn't do one before we got into this work. And anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the thing I think your book is a fine example of is, how do you take what you learn, right? So that's what a land acknowledgement process is. You should be doing research. You should be understanding why you want to do this, and you should be speaking it out. But what can you do more, right? How can you move beyond land acknowledgement to proper allyship? Because it's not enough anymore to talk about things, to speak about things. We have to be ready to act and move things forward in that positive way, and finding ways to take action to make repair, right? And so I think that's one of the things that I think, if you take anything, if anyone reads your book and they take a guilty, they start to feel that guilt, understand you're earning that. Learn from it, find a way to do better that is centralized in your values and what you want to see the world become.
I love that. Just a plug for my book, even though this is a very personal story about my family, I have loved it when people come to the end and have shared with me, this was a book about your family, but it made me think about my own. And there are resources in the back of the book that, if for those people who are inspired to start to dig into their own history and find their own proximity to this American story, and then step towards repair themselves. There are resources in the back for starting to think about how to like learn their own history, to learn the treaties that maybe are responsible for where they have their house, the highways they drive on, the way they themselves are benefiting. I know we are going to go soon to Q&A, and I'm compelled to want to share this one teaching from the Talmud, which is an ancient Jewish text that really, I think for me, has been a really guiding principle in considering how we respond. And there's this discussion in the Talmud between two rabbis, and one says, and they're debating, like, okay, what happens if it's discovered that a house or even a palace was built using a stolen beam in its foundation? What do we do? And the first rabbi says, oh, you have to tear the whole house down, and then you give that beam back. And the other rabbi, who's acknowledged to be far more pragmatic, he says, you don't have to do that. You can just replace the value of the beam. But both rabbis make it clear that once you living in the house or even the palace know that you're living on a stolen beam, you have great responsibility. Even maybe you didn't build the house, but once you know about it, you have to do something about it. And Sharon Brous, who's a rabbi out of LA, she wrote a sermon in 2017 talking about this stolen beam. And she said, our country was built on a stolen beam. And she goes on to say that to ignore it is to sort of risk having like a sense of a country that's not really legitimate. So anyway, I find that very powerful and helpful in considering how do we all start to consider this history and do something about it. Yeah.
Well, that's great. And it looks like we're at a quarter to the hour.
Okay,
So I know we're supposed to dip into Q&A,
okay.
but we talked about you reading a passage. Do you think we could take a couple? Because the passage where you're visiting with Doug in particular, I think is valuable. Would you mind? Can you read some of it really quick, just so folks who maybe haven't had a chance to read the book
Okay.
can get a sense of?
Yes, I can talk. I can read a little.
And then I promise we'll dive into Q&A, folks.
Okay. All right. So this is, so I think it's important just to tee this up in that, you know, I mentioned by 1908, when my family is planting their first crops, the Lakota, the United States has taken or stolen 98% of the land they promised to reserve for the Lakota in 1851. But the efforts to take Lakota land don't end in 1908. They are ongoing really to this day. And in the 50s, the United States puts this series of dams on the Missouri River. As you know, Wayne, your whole family was very impacted. The river flooded. The flooding impacted the majority of the people who were impacted were Native. And Doug Whitebull, like the Ducheneaux family, had to move. They had to move inland. I think, wasn't it something like on Cheyenne River, 30% of the population had to move? It was very
Yeah, it was. Yep.
And so Doug and I, one day, we went back to the area where his family's land had been. And I'll just read a little bit from that section of us visiting that land.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. One day, Doug, myself, and one of Doug's former students, Jeff McLaughlin, drive out to visit what's left of the place where Doug grew up on the edge of the Missouri River. There aren't any roads to get up there. We go up and down over buttes. We off-road in an old minivan that Jeff calls his buck. It's a truck and a van, get it? He asks me with a quick, shy smile. Jeff, like many former students, calls Doug Lake She, Lakota for uncle. As we near the cut bank, far above the deep blue water, red chokecherries and wild plum cluster in the folds and creases of the land. When we reach the grassy slope where Doug used to run barefoot with his sisters, I ask him how it feels. Feels great, feels like home, he says, closing his eyes under the bright sun. Swallows swoop through the air. The air is filled with birdsong and the buzz of insects and the river and the wind. But for the moment, I'm not noticing that. I'm distracted by our effort to touch the past. An old cemetery, fenced off and thick with chokecherry, has survived the flood. While it had been slated for removal, the water never got that high, and the feds, by neglect or delay, left it alone. Deep inside the thicket of wild plants are gravestones of Doug's relatives, and he is determined to visit. Getting there will require this blind old man, who relies on his cane as if it were a third limb, to do the equivalent of bushwhacking. I explained to Doug where to put his foot and how to hold on to my arm and Jeff's arm. I'm embarrassed to share this part, but it's what happened. On the audio file, you can hear my voice asking if this is a good idea, cautioning Doug to be careful. Jeff quietly helps Doug step over the wire fence, gets a camp chair out of the van, and sets it up in the shade in case Doug needs a break. I should have known better. By this point, I knew a lot of Doug's stories, especially his greatest hits, such as the time he, as a teenager, ran a 50-mile race, finishing with bloody feet. I knew about his time at boarding school, a place he calls a concentration camp, where he was repeatedly kicked and hit by his teachers, sometimes with a wooden board across his bottom, for the crime of not making his bed correctly. I knew he'd survived all that and become a straight A student anyway. Not a person given to giving up, Doug slowly but steadily traverses the weedy expanse from the van to the graves deep in the middle of the cemetery. He never slows down, never complains. Standing as close as we can get to the old stones, the words in the marble etched in Lakota, I read the inscription aloud to Doug, and he translates. Here was Mary Whitebull, who died May 18th, 1902. I'm struck again by the weight of Doug's loss, what has been taken from him and his family to ensure a specific brand of American progress. The money that has come to the Lakota was arguably never a fair trade for what was taken, rarely a deal negotiated without some degree of coercion. And the losses compound one another. the flooding on Doug's childhood home here on the banks of the Missouri, built on the taking of his father's land and his grandfather's land and his father's before that. And what of everything else that was stolen? What payment can ever be made to replace such a loss?
Thank you, Rebecca.
Thank you, Wayne.
For sure, one of my favorite passages in the books.
Thank
So now we got about 10 minutes left. So I want to dive into some of the Q&A. I'm going to rapid fire through some of the easy ones.
Okay.
One question that's really easy is, am I still the executive director of Native Government Center? I'm the outgoing director of Native Government Center. My last day is November 17th. Another kind of rapid fire question I think I can get out of the way is, where to go? Sorry, I'm just trying to scroll through the Q&A. What is the best way to overcome that feeling of guilt? I think I talked about that a little bit earlier, right? Where it's learn and repair, right? So understand you've earned that guilt now that you understand these things, and you have to take action.
Can I say one more thing about that?
Please.
I also think it's important to remind yourself to treat yourself with compassion, because I had an excellent education. I really did. I never learned this history. And that, of course, is intentional. I think there's something, I might be saying it wrong in this moment, but like 98% of all K-12 schools in America that do teach Native American history, they don't teach anything after 1900. So, okay, you can feel guilty. Also, remember this, you were part of a system that wasn't wanting you to know this history. And so, again, and hopefully having that compassion helps you take a turn toward action.
For sure. And real quick, I want to make sure to address the very first question that came out. There are a couple different questions about Israel and Gaza. Yeah. And so the first question is, would it be too much to also reference current events in Israel and Gaza, with the resonance and parallels to today? Do we ever learn? Do you want to start with that? Because I definitely have thoughts. So let me know if you want to go first.
You go first.
Okay. So yes, I think there is resonance and parallels that we can draw from what's going on in Israel and Gaza today. And it's one of those things that, no, we don't ever learn. But that's why, again, focusing on this history, this understanding, is a place where we can get to understand and learn. I think not only are there these parallels between the Palestinian and Native people's experience, but there's, like we talked about earlier, there's definitely the parallels between Jewish experience and Native experience. And the thing that it all has to deal with, and there's another questions about settler colonialism, is that's kind of where this all stems from, right? It all stems from settler colonialism and why people were put in places for whatever reason or had places taken away from them. And so for me, having real conversations like this, you went out, talk to Native people to try to understand this perspective. I think it's for non-Palestinian and non-Jewish people to have conversations with folks from those communities to understand this, because the only way we get through this BS is to get away from 180 characters, 2-minute sound bites. It's to really meet and understand, so that healing process, so that truth can be recognized and a healing process can begin. We're never going to solve anything over a comment fight on social media. The only way to move this forward is with intention and true relationship. And so that's kind of what I would talk about. But please go ahead.
It was beautiful. Thank you for saying that. I think the only thing I have to add is that I think there is a dehumanization that I feel like rings true over and over again in history, and that you're seeing playing out today. And it's the tool of governments that is utilized so much in war. And I think my sense at this point, having studied the history, is that the only way to combat that dehumanization is what Wayne said, to study each other's histories, to understand the oppression that multiple groups can feel at once, to really, I would love to make this as complicated and nuanced and messy as possible. And to that feels like the way, when we can understand each other's histories, we can start to, and when we understand each other's histories from the history written by the other, that's also very important. Then we can combat that dehumanization. I really, it sounds naive, and maybe it is, but I hope it's true. It's been true in my experience in working on this book. So
Yeah. Well, it all harkens back to, we each have that individual responsibility I talked about earlier to understand the why and take every step we can to make a world that is of our values. I think at the heart, people are good, in a broad stroke there, right? I understand that. But if we each need to take our personal responsibility in these things and try to find a way to reconcile what is going on juxtaposed against our values, to find a place where we can make sure that we are all have the ability to live in those values. Real quick, Susan has a question about universities. She's hearing moderators acknowledge the university is on land once owned by natives. Should the university pay rent to Native Americans? Is there something immoral about attending that university unless some compensation is paid? And I think that's really up to the individual person. There are, I think universities should do more than some of them are doing. And we've put a lot of pressure out there for that in that regard. But one of the things I think I wanted to highlight quickly is the story we talked about earlier with this idea of an honor tax. Should the university pay? That's up for them to figure out. But there was a great project that came out of our Beyond Law and Acknowledgement work at Native Governance Center called the Minnesota Makoche Honor Tax. And it was started by a Jewish attorney named Jessica Intermill, who created this opportunity for folks around the Lower Sioux Indian community to donate to the tribe for the tribe's priority work. So, and it was done the right way. It was done by creating relationship with tribal leaders, not coming in there with preconceived notions. Like, is it good to give resources? Yes, but it's also good to understand what the need is. And the only way you do that, right, is to get right with community, have those conversations like we talked about. So if you Google Minnesota Makoche Honor Tax, you can find out a little bit more information like that. I think there are a plethora of ways that you can go beyond land acknowledgement to be a true allyship with Indian country. And that's just one I wanted to make sure to highlight. Did you have any thoughts?
I did want to say from what I've learned, it's very important that as non-Native people, we follow the work that is being led by Native communities, but we're really in a wonderful moment, and because there is a lot out there. Again, in my book, I direct people, there are a lot of these sort of gift taxes, that it's a gift that we get to live in cities that were built on Native land and the taking of Native land. I was in a conversation yesterday here in Oregon with an elder, and he said it would mean a lot if like an Oregon, the descendants of homesteaders here would even just say thank you. And I think the gifting, as Chris Stainbrook, who heads the Indian Land Tenure Foundation, which is a Native-led organization that's been working to help Native communities get their land back for a long time, he said, the amount of money you give is not that important. I was really moved by that. He said, how much isn't matter. But it's a chance to live your values, putting some money behind a land acknowledgement. So I do think it's exciting and something to be done to make those relationships, to step forward and say, what do you need from me to create those connections, those relationships? Yeah.
Beautiful. We have about 2 minutes, and I apologize, y'all. There are so many questions. We're not going to have time to get to them all, but I want to maybe highlight quickly. You got about 47.5 seconds here, Rebecca. Jennifer wanted to appreciate us mentioning ignorance when it comes to history in America. Sometimes that people aren't wanting to hear the truth, but how do you deal with issues when people don't want to hear the truth, as you encounter people in your either in person or in your writing?
Well, it's really hard. I think the way I've tried to deal with it is by telling a very personal story. And my hope is that disarms people, that it allows people to sort of, I'm not preaching to them. I'm just talking about my own experience. And hopefully that's a softening and a welcoming place where people then can start to consider their own. So mostly, actually, I have not experienced in a direct way anyone saying, I reject what you're telling me. It's actually been very inspiring to see really the opposite. So for what it's worth,
wonderful.
That's true.
And now the lovely Deborah has come back on screen. I believe it's my opportunity to kick it back to you to close us out.
Absolutely. And thank you, Rebecca and Wayne. Thank you for the work each of you does, even though, Wayne, your last day is going to be on Friday. We know that you will go on to do even more wonderful things. And thank you both for your participation in this event. It was inspiring as well as informative. So many thanks to everyone, to speakers and listeners for joining today. In my view, this conversation prompts all of us to reflect and to consider issues we thought we knew something about, to consider them anew, and to recognize that there are so many things we just never knew at all. So thank you and have a wonderful day.
Thanks,
Well,
everyone. Thank you, Wayne and Deborah. What a pleasure.
Yeah, Wopalatonka, everyone, with great thanks.
With great thanks.
Bye-bye.